Okay, so you always think about the U.S. being this ultimate destination, right? Where like everyone flocks to get a better life, right? And
Yeah.
it's kind of baked into our national story. But what if I told you there's a really interesting, maybe even kind of head scratching trend happening? We're seeing more and more immigrants actually choosing to leave the U.S. It's a pretty big shift, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, when you think about that, that historical narrative, that constant influx, that image of America as the beacon, right? This reverse flow that we're seeing in our sources, it definitely makes you stop and think. It challenges that perception we've held for so long.
Yeah, for sure. So let's really kind of dive into this, right? Because it's not just one thing, right? It's not just one single reason. Looking at all this material seems like it's a whole web of interconnected issues like economic worries, concerns about safety, a sense of like political tension, just a lot of things. And obviously things like the pandemic, global stuff, that's thrown a wrench in everything for everyone. So for a lot of people who once saw the U.S. as like the ultimate goal, that view is really changing.
Yeah, it really is. And the reasons behind this outward migration, they're definitely multifaceted, but I think we can start by really focusing on the economic side of things. That seems to be a big driver. And then we need to look at the social and political climate because that plays a huge role in how people feel, right?
Yeah.
And then there's that pull of family and community back home that's always a factor, and of course quality of life considerations, things like healthcare and the opportunities for kids' education, and interestingly the rise of remote work, working from home and all that. That's adding a whole new layer to this whole thing. And then of course there's immigration policies themselves, which they have a direct impact. It's all connected.
Okay, so let's start with the economic factors, right? One thing that really jumped out to me is that the availability of jobs in certain sectors, like traditional sectors in the U.S., it seems like those jobs are drying up a little bit for immigrants. But what's interesting is our sources point to other countries with what they call these burgeoning industries,
Right.
like tech, healthcare, all that innovation stuff, and renewable energy. It's almost like there's a competition, a global competition for talent, and the U.S. isn't automatically at the top anymore. Have you seen any specific examples of that shift happening?
Oh, absolutely. Our research points to a scenario where, you have immigrants with skills in engineering, let's say, and they're finding more opportunities, better paying opportunities in places like Canada or certain parts of Europe, places where governments are really putting a lot of money into things like green technology. So it's not just about having a job, it's
Yeah.
about finding a career that you can grow in, a career that has security. And sometimes those opportunities they're just more plentiful elsewhere right now.
Right, right. And it's not just about, whether the jobs are there, right? It's also about how much those skills are actually valued, like financially.
Yeah.
Our sources talk about these wage disparities, like, immigrants feeling like their qualifications, they're not really recognized here the way they thought they would be. So their wages are lower than what they expected. But then you have these other countries where wages are going up and the job market is really good for them. One source even mentions these salary differences across borders being like substantial. So like what kind of numbers are we talking about here?
We're seeing reports that suggest, for certain specialized roles, particularly in the tech sector, that countries like Australia or Switzerland, they might offer salaries that are 15 to 25% higher than comparable positions in the U.S. And when you factor in the cost of living, which we'll get to, that difference becomes even more significant. It can really, really sway someone's decision.
Yeah, totally. Which brings us to the cost of living here, right? I mean, things like housing, healthcare costs that are just through the roof, and even just like everyday stuff, the price of groceries. One source uses the phrase "unbearable strain," and you can really picture that pressure on families. If your wages aren't keeping up with all these rising costs, staying in the U.S. might not be viable or sustainable, as another source puts it. I mean, have you come across any specific examples that really highlight that strain, that unbearable strain.
Yeah, we came across a lot of accounts of families, living in big U.S. cities where even with two people working, affording a decent place to live and having healthcare coverage, it just became this insurmountable challenge. So, the constant worry about medical bills or trying to save for a down payment on a house, something that might be more achievable back home or another developed country, it leads them to conclude that the financial stability they were looking for in the U.S. it's actually more attainable somewhere
Right.
else.
Yeah. And it's not just the natural ups and downs of the economy, right? Our sources also point to economic policies.
Yeah.
Things like proposed changes to immigration regulations,
Hmm.
shifts in labor laws, all that. And that can create a lot of uncertainty. It can really jeopardize job security, and it might make people start looking at countries with more predictable, economic situations. So how do these policy changes, how do they actually create that sense of jeopardy, that risk?
Well, let's say, you're an immigrant worker and you see, a proposal for a new law that could make it harder to renew your work visa, or there's talk about stricter labor regulations in your industry. That creates this feeling of instability, right?
Yeah.
It's unsettling. And you might start thinking, okay, well, maybe I should look at countries where the immigration policies are more clear cut. Where my right to work, to live, it's less likely to change suddenly. It's about finding a place where you feel secure, where you can plan for the future. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's move into what I think is a really, really crucial aspect of this whole thing, the social and political climate. Our sources talk about this noticeable rise in xenophobia and discrimination, and then you can imagine how that would create a really unwelcoming environment for anyone who's made the U.S. their home. What kind of experiences are we seeing documented in these sources?
We've seen reports of everything from verbal harassment and discrimination in everyday life to concerns about racial profiling and unequal treatment at work. And it's not just about, isolated incidents. It's about this broader feeling that the social environment, it's become less tolerant, less accepting. And that can have a profound impact on an immigrant's sense of safety, of belonging in their adopted country. It makes you question, am I really welcome here?
And the sources also point out how political rhetoric, what people in positions of power are saying, how that can actually shape public opinion. And unfortunately, it can lead to the stigmatization of whole immigrant communities. It's a powerful connection, right? With what's being said at the top, it really can filter down and affect how individuals and whole communities are viewed and treated. Can you kind of elaborate on how that rhetoric actually manifests itself, how it plays out in real life?
Well, when you have political leaders, public figures using negative language or blaming immigrant communities for problems in society,
Yeah.
it can create this environment where prejudice is more easily accepted. And that can manifest itself in so many ways, in everyday conversations, in the media, even in how policies are debated. It contributes to this feeling of being targeted, of being devalued.
Right, yeah. And then there are the actual policies, right?
Yeah.
The stringent immigration policies and the heightened enforcement measures. Our sources suggest that these things, they leave immigrants feeling really vulnerable, marginalized, like they're always on edge. And it creates this sense of instability, and it even affects their mental well-being, the fear of deportation, workplace discrimination, just general hostility from the public. That sounds incredibly stressful to live with every day.
It is. It really is. That the constant worry about your legal status, the fear of being separated from your family or being treated unfairly because of your immigration status, it creates this chronic stress, this anxiety. It's a fundamental sense of insecurity that can permeate every aspect of your life. And it makes the idea of living somewhere else, somewhere more stable, more welcoming, it makes it incredibly appealing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's not just about individual experiences either, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like this rising discrimination, it can also weaken the bonds within immigrant communities themselves. Those really important support systems that people rely on when they move to a new country.
Yeah.
The sources suggest that this can lead people to really question their place in American society, and it can erode their sense of belonging. So how does this internal strain, how does it manifest itself within these communities?
When immigrant communities feel like they're they're under attack or they're facing increased scrutiny, it can sadly lead to divisions within the community or a reluctance to engage as openly as they might have in the past. Trust can erode, and that sense of collective support, which is so vital when you're navigating a new culture, it can diminish, and that leads to increased isolation, and it makes it that much harder to deal with the challenges of living in a new country.
Right, yeah. Okay, so let's talk about something that's deeply personal, right?
Uh,
Family and community ties. Our sources really emphasize the crucial role that these play in the decision to go back to their countries of origin. They highlight the emotional connections, the longing for what's familiar. You can build a successful life here, but that connection to home, it doesn't just disappear, does it? Have you seen evidence of that pull back to their roots?
Absolutely. Our sources, they really underscore the strength of these family and community bonds. Even after years of living abroad, building new lives, the desire to be closer to loved ones, to share in their joys, to support them through difficult times, it remains a very powerful motivator. It's a fundamental human need for connection.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And the sources, they specifically mention the desire to be closer to relatives as a compelling reason,
Yeah.
especially because of the emotional strain of being physically distant,
Yeah.
especially during those big life events.
Mm.
It's those moments, births, deaths, weddings, even just important holidays where being physically separated, it can feel really, really hard.
Yeah, it can. And those are the moments that often highlight the sacrifices that come with immigration. And they can really intensify that longing for home. The inability to easily participate in those events, to offer support, to share those experiences firsthand, it can create a deep sense of loss.
Right. And beyond just immediate family, there's also that yearning for community support, right? The comfort of being surrounded by people who share your culture, your values, your traditions. Our sources point out how this can really help with those feelings of isolation that can sometimes come up from, cultural differences, language barriers, all that. So
Yeah.
what's the impact of that shared cultural understanding, that feeling of being among your people?
That sense of cultural resonance, it's incredibly important for your overall well-being. Being around people who understand your background, who speak your language, who share your cultural references, it provides a really deep sense of comfort. It reduces that feeling of being an outsider.
Yeah. Okay. So quality of life and healthcare, those are big factors too, right? Our sources raise concerns about the effectiveness and reliability of the American healthcare system, and the potential financial burdens, especially
Yeah.
compared to other developed countries. This must be a huge thing for people to think about, especially if they have families.
Yeah, healthcare is a cornerstone of quality of life, and the complexities of the U.S. system, the costs, it can be a major source of anxiety, especially for immigrant families. They may not be as familiar with how it all works. They might face language barriers and the fear of high medical bills, the whole insurance system. It can be really daunting.
The sources, they contrast the U.S. with countries that have what they call universal healthcare systems, like Canada, the UK, the Scandinavian countries, where public funding basically ensures that everyone has access to medical care regardless of their financial situation. That must offer a real sense of security, right? Have you seen any specific examples of how this affects people's decisions?
Yeah, we've seen accounts of people who decided to go back to their home countries or move to countries with universal health care, specifically because they had, chronic health conditions or they were starting families, and they wanted that peace of mind of knowing that healthcare would be accessible, affordable, without the constant worry of financial ruin. It's about prioritizing health and well-being in a way that the US system doesn't always make possible.
Right, right. And it's not just about the overall system, but also the differences in healthcare access,
Yeah.
across the different U.S. states, and the disparities that affect immigrants in both urban and rural areas. It's not a uniform experience depending on where you live.
No, it's not. And those geographic differences in healthcare access, they can create real challenges, particularly for those who are living in underserved areas where there might be fewer medical facilities, fewer specialists, and then you add in language barriers, a lack of culturally competent healthcare providers, and it creates real obstacles to getting adequate care.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so beyond healthcare, our sources also emphasize the importance of of quality of education and safety. It makes perfect sense that immigrants would want good schools and safe communities for their families, right? Places with low crime rates. What aspects of safety are highlighted in the sources?
Well, the sources touch on concerns about rising crime rates in certain areas, anxieties about community safety, the well-being of their children in schools. I mean, these are fundamental concerns for any parent, and countries that are seen as offering a more secure, a more stable environment, they can be very attractive alternatives.
Yeah, and that leads us right into education, right? Educational opportunities and what the future holds for kids. Our sources are very clear that the quality of education is a crucial factor for immigrant families when they're thinking about moving. It's all about giving their kids the best possible future. What are the main things driving this concern?
For a lot of immigrant parents, providing their children with a good education, it's a primary reason why they migrated in the first place. They often make huge sacrifices with the hope that their children will have more opportunities, to succeed academically, professionally. So when they're deciding whether to stay in the US or go somewhere else, the quality of the education system is a key factor.
Yeah, and our sources they bring up concerns about the American system, things like overcrowded classrooms, inconsistent quality of instruction, big differences in resources between schools. It's not exactly a picture of equal opportunity for all students, is it?
No, it's not. And those are valid concerns. Those things can have a real impact on a child's education. Disparities in funding, teacher to student ratios, the availability of specialized programs, it can lead to very different outcomes for students depending on where they live, and that can be a major worry for parents who are trying to provide the best education for their kids.
Yeah, and then the sources point to other countries like Canada, Germany, certain Asian nations that have what they call these robust educational frameworks. They're characterized by things like smaller class sizes, diverse and well-funded curricula, and a real emphasis on the overall well-being of the student. That sounds really good, from a parent's perspective.
It does, and those countries they've often invested heavily in their education systems, and they prioritize a more holistic approach to learning. They're not just focused on grades, but also on social and emotional development. The smaller class sizes allow for more individual attention, and the curricula are designed to cater to a wider range of learning styles and interests.
And it's interesting. The sources mention how supportive the environment often is for international students in some of these countries. It really encourages, cultural exchange and integration starting right there in school. Plus, more and more multilingual programs are becoming available, and that makes education a lot more accessible for families with different language backgrounds. It's a really thoughtful approach.
Yeah, it is. That inclusivity in education, it can make a huge difference for immigrant families. Having language support, programs that help children integrate culturally, it can really, really ease their transition into a new school and set them up for success.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something a little more modern that's influencing all this technology. Our sources talk about how technology is everywhere now and how remote work has become such a big thing. And this is actually changing the equation for some immigrants. It's allowing them to think about going back to their home countries while still keeping their jobs here in the U.S.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big change, isn't it? So how's this working in real life?
Well, the growth of remote work has basically meant that for a lot of jobs that can be done online, you don't have to be in a specific location anymore. And this gives a lot of flexibility to immigrants who might have personal reasons for wanting to go back home, to be closer to family, to experience their culture again, but they don't want to give up their U.S. income or their career.
Right, right. So it sounds like remote work can offer this really attractive combination, right? You get to live somewhere that maybe has a lower cost of living. You can reconnect with family and your cultural roots, and you can still earn a U.S. salary.
Yeah.
It's kind of like getting the best of both worlds in some cases.
Yeah, exactly. The financial benefits of living somewhere with a lower cost of living, they can be substantial. And when you combine that with the emotional and social benefits of being back in a familiar environment, it can be a really, really appealing option.
And the sources point out how all the communication tools we have now, the collaboration platforms, all that stuff, it makes it so much easier for teams to work together across different time zones. So, physical distance, it's less of a barrier to getting work done. It's making it possible for people to leave and still keep working pretty seamlessly. It's not the career disruption that it might have been in the past.
Yeah, technology has really changed things. The ability to stay connected and productive no matter where you are, it's opened up all these new possibilities for immigrants who are thinking about going back home, or even exploring new opportunities in other countries while still keeping their US employment.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so finally, let's talk about the direct impact of immigration policies and regulations. Our sources really stress that looking closely at these is crucial to understanding why people are leaving. It's not just about individual choices, it's also about the legal and political framework, right, that plays a huge role. So how do these policies act as a sort of push factor, pushing people away?
Well, government policies and regulations, they create the framework within which immigrants live and work, right? So when those policies are seen as restrictive or unpredictable or just unwelcoming, they can really influence an immigrant's decision about whether to stay in the US long term. It's about feeling like you're secure, like you have a clear path forward.
The sources mention how recent changes in laws and shifting attitudes from the government, how those have really influenced immigrants' decisions. And it sounds like a less welcoming political climate can really make people start thinking about other options, places where they might feel more secure, more valued.
Yeah, and if there's a perception that enforcement is getting stricter, and you combine that with public discourse that's seen as hostile or exclusionary, it can create this climate of fear and uncertainty, and that can make individuals and families feel less welcome, and they might start looking for countries where they believe they'll find more stability, more acceptance.
And those efforts to tighten borders, those can create a lot of instability, a real feeling of precariousness, like you're not really sure where you stand. The sources talk about the constant threat of deportation or the difficulties in renewing visas. That level of anxiety, it must be really, really tough to deal with every day.
It is. The fear of being separated from your loved ones or facing legal problems because of complex and constantly changing immigration laws, it's incredibly stressful. And when people feel like their legal status is always in question, they might start looking for countries with immigration systems that are more clearly defined, less punitive.
Yeah, and then you have the unpredictability of things like green card applications and the wait times for visa approvals, which can be incredibly long. It's like your whole life is on hold, and you can't really plan for the future.
Yeah, those long and often confusing immigration processes, they put a lot of strain on individuals and families. They delay their ability to really integrate into society, to make long-term plans. And that uncertainty can be a major factor in pushing people to consider countries where the path to residency or citizenship is more straightforward, more predictable.
And it's not just the policies themselves, it's also the tone, the language that government officials use when they talk about immigration. Our sources suggest that this can really foster feelings of alienation, and it can make immigrants feel unwelcome. It can actually be a catalyst for them to look for opportunities elsewhere. Words really do matter, don't they?
They do. The language that political leaders and public figures use, it can have a huge impact on the social climate and how immigrants are perceived and treated. Welcoming and inclusive rhetoric can foster a sense of belonging, while negative or divisive language can contribute to feelings of marginalization. It can make people feel like they don't have a future in that country. It really shapes the overall atmosphere.
Okay, so to kind of bring all this together, we've looked at this really complex set of interconnected factors that seem to be driving this immigrant exodus from the U.S. We talked about economic pressures, the impact of the social and political climate, the importance of family ties, concerns about basic quality of life, things like healthcare and safety, how crucial education is, the new role of remote work, and the very direct influence of immigration policies. It's a lot to take in, isn't it?
It is. It's a really intricate interplay of all these different factors, and as you said, they're often interconnected. They reinforce each other. It's not just one single issue that's causing this shift, but a whole combination of economic realities, social perceptions, personal desires, policy impacts.
And it raises some big questions, doesn't it? Like, what does all this mean for the U.S. going forward? What could it mean for our job market, our economic growth? If skilled people are choosing to leave, how could it affect our relationships with other countries? And maybe maybe most importantly, what does this say about us, about our identity as a multicultural society, as the land of opportunity?
Yeah, those are crucial questions. A sustained outflow of immigrants could have significant consequences in all sorts of areas. You know, it could impact our economic competitiveness, our cultural diversity, our standing in the world. It really makes you think about the long-term effects.
It almost feels like this exodus, as some of our sources say, it could be a wake-up call. It might force us to really rethink what it means to belong in America today, and how we can create a more inclusive, welcoming, opportunity-rich environment for people from all over the world. It makes you think about, well, what kind of society we want to be.
It does. It really does. And this trend, it gives us a chance to reflect on our values, our policies, our social norms.
Yeah.
You know, how can we better attract and keep talented individuals who contribute so much to our communities, our economy?
Right. And it leaves you wondering about the long-term consequences and how things might shift globally. You know, if the traditional patterns of immigration are changing, where are people going instead, and what does that mean for those new destination countries? It's definitely something to think about,
Yeah.
how these shifting tides might reshape the whole world.
Yeah, it's a fascinating and complex issue with far-reaching implications. It'll be interesting to see how things unfold.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for breaking all this down with me. It's been
Mhm.
a really thought-provoking conversation.
My pleasure. Always happy to delve into these important topics.
Okay, so that's it for this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, and we hope you found it informative. If you want to learn more, check out the show notes for links to all the sources we used. And be sure to join us next time for another deep dive into the issues shaping our world.
See you then.
Bye for now.